Hello everyone. Welcome along to a bit of fun with Android development. However, I did just describe it as fun, but we're talking about Java here, so your results may vary. Now, I'm just going to double check that I've not just overshot that. Make sure. It's so loud. It's fine. Welcome. Talk to me in the Twitch chat. If you've got any questions, feel free to ping me on the Twitch chat. I will be keeping an eye on that throughout the stream. If I miss it, keep pinging. Someone will let me know. And yeah, so before we start, we'll just wait for a few people to join. Has anyone tried making an Android app before? If you have, let me know in the chat. Start waving at me, start screaming, whatever floats your boat. If you haven't, more than welcome to come along. Great place to start, because only a year ago was when I started learning how to make apps, and I still wouldn't consider myself any sort of expert as such, but you know, does Flutter count? Ooh, well, I would say Flutter counts, but it's quite different to what I'm going to be showing you today. Does this count? Don't know about that. So we'll get started in just a second. So I'm gonna tease you with what I've got to do. So I've got to try and open my presenter notes without Keynote crying. So this could be slightly problematic, but we'll work with it. Right. So now the real question is, if I press this button, you should be able to see my slides. We'll find out in a minute. Anyway, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Will. I'm from the Hackathons UK and the UK Hackathon community. This is my 16th hackathon. I'm also the coordinator for Hack Quarantine, so if you've got any problems, any questions or anything, feel free to DM me on Discord. My username is on the screen, as you can see below somewhere. But yeah, feel free to shout out to me. I'm more than happy to help. And let's get started. So, first of all, what makes an Android app? Now, this is a great question. Someone in the chat has already said Flutter. Now, Flutter, for those of you who've been to the other Flutter workshops, we've had 2 of them so far. Flutter is a mobile development framework that lets you build apps for iOS and Android. It's written in you write the apps in a language called Dart, which is a kind of sexy language. I do quite like Dart, to be honest. But yeah, you can. Is the stream died? Nah, it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, you can. Yeah, Flutter's quite nice because it works on both, but it's written quite differently to how you would write a typical Android app. So let me just try reopening the stream so I can. It's all fine. It's all good. Come talk to me. Okay, so an Android app. It's definitely not made up of this. This is Swift, the language you use to build iOS apps. If you're here for Swift, come along next Wednesday, 1st of April, with our friend Ikra from Manchester. We'll be teaching you how to make Swift apps in Swift UI. Unfortunately, I'm not going to show you that today, so I'm sorry. So definitely not Swift. Now, Android apps were primarily built in Java. So Java is an object-oriented language that's been around for years and years and years, and it's kind of being replaced by a lot of these new, sexier languages. So all your logic in Android is written in Java, so you write lots of classes and stuff, and there's a lot of object-oriented programming here. So if you're not familiar with object-oriented programming or Java, you might find it a little bit difficult to follow along. However, don't worry, you can watch the video on demand on YouTube later. You can learn a bit of Java and catch up later. However, I'm just going to be running through the fundamentals of what makes an Android app and not really being too specific with Java. So don't worry if you're not an expert at Java. Now, the next thing is XML. XML is how we define our user interface. So with an app, it's really important that we have a UI, something that the user can touch and see, and it has all the information they need when they're trying to use the app. So this is done in XML, which is a markup language, a bit like HTML, and it's very human readable. You can also modify what the UI looks like with Java directly, which is quite handy if you need to change what the UI looks like when you're building your app. Let's say you click a button, you want it to change something, then you can do that all in Java, but let's say you're just using a default screen that you're not changing. You can do all of that by default in XML. Now, this is all tied together with Gradle. Gradle helps build the app, creating an APK, which for some reason abbreviates to Android Application Package. I'm not entirely sure where the K or the P come from, really, in that order, but we'll go with it. The APK is the executable that runs on Android, which contains all the UI and the logic together. Think of it like an exe executable on Windows or a .dmg on macOS, that sort of idea. Now, there is a new kid on the block. This kid is super cool, thinks he's like the coolest kid, wears his hat backwards, has his trousers lowered. He's one of those cool kids, right? And his name is Kotlin. Kotlin has recently replaced Java as the default language for Android development. Google has acknowledged that, maybe you shouldn't run with an old language that's a bit grim to write, because if you've never written Java, there's lots of boilerplate code. It's a bit slow. It's just a bit slow to write. It's not very enjoyable, right? Part of the thing about being a developer is, you want to enjoy what you're doing, and apps are cool, right? But, no one wants to write, lots of Java. So, now we've got that out of the way. Now we know roughly what makes up an Android app. Now, let's have a look to see what happens when you start a project. So, Android apps are built in Android Studio, which is an IDE which is based off IntelliJ, which is something that some of you might have used for Java. Android Studio is quite bloated. You've probably seen the memes around where people are like, if you're getting cold at winter, don't worry. Just turn on Android Studio and you'll be warm in no time. So there's a reason for that, because Android apps have a lot going on for them. They can be quite intimidating, but don't let this put you off. We're going to go through each layer of folders and break it down, starting at the top of the project. Right at the end on the right hand side, you'll see our code, which is our activities. We'll explain a little bit more what that means in a bit. And on the right hand side, we've got our UI. In the middle, we've got our UI under the resources folder. Now, disclaimer, I am probably going to refer to res as resolution, because if you're, a gamer, which I am, you always refer to resolution as res. And the amount of times I've done this workshop about 5 times now, and every single time I've accidentally said resolution when I mean resources. So if I do it, please call me out. Someone in the chat has said APK stands for Android Package Kit. Now that makes way more sense. I'm going to go with that one and change my speaker notes next time. So, starting right at the top of the project structure, we have our build.gradle and our app directory. So, there's other stuff as well, but they're not important right now. So the build.gradle is used to specify how Gradle is going to build your app. For the most part, you can leave this alone. The ones that are more interesting to us are inside of the app directory. So there's another build.gradle inside of here, and you're probably thinking, why the hell is there 2? So, well, for a basic app like one we're going to build, this is not necessary to have 2, right? It comes in handy when you're going to build apps for different versions of Wear OS, right? So I have a Wear OS watch here, you can probably see, and, the Android apps are built quite similar, but obviously they're completely different things, right? I've got my phone here. These are completely different bits of hardware, so there's no point trying to build the same app for them. So one thing you can do that's quite nice is you can share some of the libraries that they need using the 2 different build.gradles. You can have one at the top, which kind of covers everything, and then if you need more specific requirements, like, a heart rate sensor, which my phone doesn't have, right? Or something to do with watches, have a Google. So this is why you'd have 2 separate build.gradles, because then you can specify the requirements for each individual module, let's call it. Next, we dive into our source folder. We're going to skip down twice again because there's nothing in the source folder apart from the main. And inside of our main folder, we have the Android manifest and 2 directories, which is where our code and UI sit. Code is sat in the Java one, and our UI is sat in the resources. Now, I nearly said resolution, but I didn't. Now, let's have a quick look at the Android manifest. So, the Android manifest describes essential information about your app to build tools, as well as the Android OS and Google Play. So this will specify what activities you had. At the moment, I'm going to refer to those as screens, but we'll cover that a little bit later. And it contains like the name of the app, what icon it's going to use, and those kind of things, and maybe the package, which if you've written Java before, you'll understand what that means. So here's an example of the app. This is the guessing game app that we'll be making a little bit later. It's not particularly complicated, but your app will not run without one of these. It kind of just ties everything together. Now, inside of the Java folder, we have all of our Java code. Inside of here, we've got all of our Java packages defined. So in this case, I've got com.wheelrussell.guessinggame in this case. The app we're writing today will be in Java, but we could have written it in Kotlin if we wanted to. Now, I am running the same workshop on the 6th of April in Kotlin. So if you're interested in learning a little bit of Kotlin, come along. It'll be the same thing, but I will be talking a little bit more about writing Kotlin and kind of showing that off a little bit. Now, inside of the resources folder, we have 4 other folders. This is where we define things like the icons inside of drawables, UI inside of layouts, menus and stuff like that inside of menu. Oh no, strings, colors, styles, and dimensions all inside of the values folder. So drawable. So inside of the drawable folder, this is where our icons are included. So here's an example of what icons may look like. They are stored inside of the drawable directory. Android Studio lets you add material design icons straight into your app without having to download anything off the internet. So this could be any of the icons that you've seen in Google Apps, such as Gmail or Google Calendar. You can access all of those material design icons with inside of Android Studio and import those straight into your app. You can also add your own SVGs and PNGs too, so you can really make your app look like your own and not just another Google one. Next, we have our layout directory, which contains all the code that describes our UI. This is written in XML, but we'll talk a bit more about this later. Next, we have our layout directory, which contains all the code that describes... What am I saying? Did I just say... Oh, I just said the same thing twice. This is a view, for example. So here we can see a text view, and this is one view. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that's just a little tease. Now, the menu directory, well, this contains, have a guess, menus. The app doesn't actually, the app we're going to make doesn't have any menus, but if we did have any menus, we'd plop them in here. These are also written in XML, slightly differently, but the same sort of idea. Now we have our values folder. So inside of here, we've got our colors. We've got colors, which is also defined in XML, and we can define colors in hexadecimal. We've also got our dimensions, which is like maybe like margins, padding, size of font, for example. Anything you can imagine you can put in here, and you can define it in any sort of size you like. We've got our strings, where we would put all the strings we're going to use in the app on like the UI and stuff, or in pop-ups and stuff, because it can be easily referenced. So when we're updating the app, let's just say we completely change something or want to change something like a version number, we can easily update it in one place, and it's much easier to maintain. And lastly, we have the styles, which is where the theme of our app is designed, but also you can get a little bit more, style the different components in here as well. This is quite a good place if you want to make something like a dark theme, or if you've got different themes for different times of the day, for example. So we've quickly talked about UI, and now we're going to talk about components. So the components is what actually makes up the app. There are 4 different types of components, which are the essential building blocks for our app. They are all entries into your app from both a user and system perspective. So these are kind of really crucial, and you may not realize that you're working with components if you've ever played around with Android Studio before, but once I've explained this should hopefully clear up a few things and make things make a lot more sense. So first of all, we've got activities. This is the entry point for interacting with the user. So it's a single screen with a UI, and such as here you could list emails, compose a new email, or reading a new email. On the screen right now, we've got an app I made called Yo Sushi Price Calculator. I need to take this off Google Play because it is quite outdated and the prices aren't right. However, due to COVID-19, no one's eating in Yo Sushi, so I've got a chance to actually update the prices now. However, they might change them. So this is just a very basic app I made, and it's got one activity with all the buttons on the screen using layouts, which we'll talk a bit more about later. Now, our next entry point is for keeping an app running in the background. So let's say you're listening to music or downloading a file off Chrome or something like that. It doesn't necessarily need a UI. It just needs to keep the app open in the background. It could be as simple as you're on a voice call and you're on Google Duo, because everyone uses Google Duo. Let's say Facebook Messenger video call, right? If you then close the app and go into another one, it would normally just kill the app, right? And your video call would go. So it'd have to start a service in the background to make sure that it keeps running. Now, next we have our broadcast receivers. Broadcast receivers enable the system to deliver events. These kind of events can be used for communication between the app and the operating system. For example, this could be when a phone goes into or out of airplane mode. Now, let's say you've got some nice, fancy Bluetooth headphones, right? Pretty common nowadays. Now, this wonderful thing called the headphone jack has disappeared. It's quite sad, really. Now, we can use, so this would be an example where if you had like a Bose QC35s, right? Really nice noise-cancelling headphones. If you open the app and your Bluetooth's off, the app's going to be like, well, I can't do anything. unless I'm connected to the headphones. So the app would prompt to open up Bluetooth settings, for example, or turn on Bluetooth. Now, this is an example where a broadcast receiver is quite useful. Obviously, that's a very basic example. They can do way more. I'm only going to touch on it briefly, as this is an introduction, but that's kind of just an insight. And lastly is the content providers. Now, someone else is running an Android workshop on this at some point. I can't remember when. Check the schedule. But someone is going to be talking all about how data is managed inside of an Android app and databases and all that. I would highly recommend going to that. It should be really interesting. The speaker is way better at Android development than me. And should hopefully be able to explain that way better than me. But it looks, so a content provider is where how you would interact with data and database issues, management stuff inside of an app. This could be such as like interacting with an SQL-Lite database, depending on the complexity of your app. However, most apps I've ever built are normally just aren't that complicated, so I haven't ever needed a database, but this is how you would do it. So it's all well and good that I've talked about components, right? But the real question is, how do you use a component? So there's 3 of the 4 components, all of them but the content providers, use a thing called an intent. Now, an intent can be described as a asynchronous message. What that really means is it binds individual components at runtime. So here is your wonderful intent. It looks a little bit like this. Now, you'll be glad to know that I recently changed this slide because it was originally written in Kotlin about, a few hours ago. And every time I've run this workshop, it's been gradually in Kotlin, and there's been most of it's been in Java, but there's been the odd bit of Kotlin in there. This is written in Java. So as you can see in the code, we created an intent object where we pass it the context known as this, so it knows roughly what's going on. And we also give it the partyActivity.class. Now, this is the other Java class I've made. The main one is called, main activity. The party activity is the one I want to open, so that the user, when they press this button, if they get the answer correct, it will then open this activity and show them something. So what I do is I create the object, and then I hand it over to this function, or this method that already exists from a parent class called startActivityForResult. You pass it that, and I give it the number 1. The reason for that is because when it ends, it's going to return the value 1. And I can kind of listen for that number and catch it, and then it depends. I can then work out what the user did in that other activity and then do the next thing based on that. So let's say a user let's say they open an app and they've got 2 buttons they can press. If they press one of them, how would I know which ones they press, right? So when it closes the activity, it will kind of listen to work out what result there was. I won't touch on that too much, but I'll show you off how it works. So, we've talked about components. Now we know roughly how the logic works. And I've teased you for quite a while now. I think it's only fair that I actually tell you how a user interface works. So, now we know how the app works under the hood. How can we display stuff to a user? Well, we need to write a user interface, but we need to understand how that works first before we can write one, because you'll just get very confused. So first of all, your user interface, as I've mentioned, is written in XML. This can look pretty daunting at first, but Android Studio can let you visualize it a little bit like this to kind of make it easier. And after a bit of practice, XML does come quite naturally, as it is pretty human readable. If you look at it, you can kind of work out what everything's doing. It's just remembering what they are. And it's the same with something like Git. I personally found that the way I know how to use Git is by just doing it, right? The more I practice, the more it stays in my head, the more I don't have to Google basic things like how do I commit, for example. It's now how do I resolve my merge conflicts, but we won't go there. If XML isn't your thing, Android Studio also gives you the ability to drag and drop your views on the screen. The drag and drop view definitely helps you get started, but can feel quite limiting or can kind of bloaty with lots of buttons and boxes everywhere, so it can be a bit confusing, but it's really good to get started. So this is all well and good, but what actually makes up a UI, right? The UI is made up of all sorts of things, and even if you want to just drag and drop stuff, it can still get pretty confusing. So I've created this wonderful diagram to hopefully try and explain what's going on. This diagram shows how... So we've got views and we've got view groups. A view is a single component on the UI. This could be like text, a label, a button, images, etc. Just a single component, right? And then we've got a view group, which can also be referred to as a layout. And these kind of contain the views, right? And hold them together and tell them how to lay out. So, for example, you could have, if you've got 4 text boxes, right? You might want those all in a line. You might want those in a square, right? And a view group lets you kind of define that. So there is actually several different types of view groups, and obviously views. And here's an example where I've actually put real view groups and views onto my diagram. So now you can see we've got a linear layout, which stores everything in a linear order, hint in the name. You can specify whether it's vertical or horizontal. So if you want to have things all the way down, for example, that's quite useful for that. It contains 4 different views in this example. These could be, let's just say it's 4 text boxes or with a button at the bottom. Now, let's say I wanted to put 2 text boxes next to each other. I can put another linear layout inside of the existing one and have that in a horizontal orientation. So now I can have 2 views next to each other and 3 underneath, which makes life a little bit easier. Now we've done that, we've also got a constraint layout. Now, I'm not going to talk about this in a huge amount of detail, but the way a constraint layout works is it kind of tells all the views to be constrained by other views on the screen. So if I hop back a little bit to here, you can see that I'm actually using a constraint layout in this example, and I've got a text view, which is just text, an edit text, which is like a text box that I can type in. So let's say if I wanted to enter a name or something, and I've got a button, which is a button. Now, you can see that I've told these all to be constrained by different things. Some of that could be the parent, which is the actual screen on the phone, right? So the edges of the screen, or I can tell it to be the on the individual components. So I could views. So I could say I want you to be constrained by this text box. So it knows that if the text box gets bigger, it will also move, and it means that your app will scale a bit better for a tablet. Or bigger phones and stuff, and it kind of helps, because something with Android development that you don't have with iOS development is the fact that there is lots and lots and lots of different size screens for an Android phone, right? On iOS, how many iPhones are there, right? There is, you got your iPhone 3, you got your iPhone 4 screen, your iPhone 5. I think the 3 and 4 have the same size, right? There's 2 screens there. 6 and the 6 Plus, they're the same aspect ratio. And then you got the new 10 and the 10R and the 11s and all that, right? That's only a very small number of screen sizes that you need to make sure your app works on. Whereas Android, right? Samsung makes how many phones, and they all might have a slightly different screen size, so it gets quite complicated quite quickly. Now I'm going to skip right back, and I think it's time that we make our live demo. So I'm going to show you how to create your very own guessing game app from scratch. I'm going to suggest that you don't try and follow along with me. I would suggest that you wait for this to be recorded and put onto YouTube, and you go along at your own pace, because it can be quite hard to debug over the Twitch chat. Sometimes I'll debug this in person, but for today, I'll just go along and I'll explain what I'm doing, and you can follow along at home. Also, all of the code I've mentioned today, as well as my slides, can be found online, and I'll post that in the Twitch chat right now. So if you go to my GitHub, which is github.com/wrussell1999, you can find all of the slides we mentioned inside of Android Workshop-Java, which is at the top of my repositories list. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to now work out how this is going to work. So first things first is we need to get Android Studio open. And if you don't already have Android Studio open, I'd suggest getting that downloaded ASAP if you want to have a work on this later, because it's quite a big big application, you could say. Now, I have completely ruined my display now. I have no idea what you guys can see. Not a clue. Actually, not a clue. Oh gosh. Okay. So, everything's gone a little bit wrong in me trying to resolve the problems, but it's okay. I can't currently see OBS. You can see. Okay, that's fine. There you go. You can see my face now. So I'm just trying to. You can probably hear Android Studio does make my laptop spin up, and I have quite a powerful laptop, so don't worry if your computer struggles. Now, right. We do have a few problems we're trying to get. Well, isn't this a bundle of fun? Okay, what we're going to have to do is, I'm sorry iPad, off you go. iPad has been disconnected. Big sad time. If anyone's used Sidecar and Keynote at the same time, you understand that it's quite frustrating. Things don't always work as intended, which can be mildly frustrating. Oh god, OBS is broken. It's fine. Okay, so if I press auto right now, I'm hoping that you can see my screen. Hopefully. Okay, so we'll just wait for the chat. I hope everyone followed along. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in chat. I'll be more than happy to help. Also, you can at me on the Discord. I'm WRussell1999, as you can see at the bottom of the screen right now. More than happy to answer any of your questions, and feel free to tweet at me as well. So, we can see it. Wonderful. That is exactly what I want to hear. Okay, so now I've got Android Studio open. First thing I'm going to do is going to start a new Android Studio project. Now, this can be pretty daunting. I'm going to just go for an empty activity. I don't want any other things in the way. We're going to start really basic. Next. Okay. Yeah. Next, I'm just kind of waiting for the stream to catch up. Next, we're going to create the game. I'm going to call this Hack Quarantine. And I'm going to put this in a folder that's not that. Put it in my workshops folder, right? We'll just put it there. Easy. You get the option to say whether you want to write it in Java or Kotlin. So I'm going to pick Java. You can pick API level. So this is quite important. So this is what version of Android will be the minimum requirement that it will run on. So I'm going to pick Android Lollipop because that's when they introduced material design, which means it will look way more modern. Because I believe Android Lollipop was released in 2014, which is 6 years ago. Scary to think how quickly time's gone. So we'll pick Lollipop, and that will work on 85% of devices, it reckons. Now, if I pick Android R, which is a developer review, it's going to say less than 1 because no one's actually, it's not in production, no one's really got it. Again, Android 10, which some of you may be running, I've got it on my OnePlus 7 Pro. Samsung phones now have it, Google Pixels. Yeah, Android Oreo, only 6% of devices? Seriously? Interesting. I imagine a lot of devices on Pi. A lot of people like holding on to their old phones. Okay, and we're going to just go from there and click Finish. So now Android Studio is going to open up. What's going to happen here is it's going to start indexing our app. I'm using a theme, so it's... There we go. It's now indexing our app. So what it's doing is Gradle will now index and have a look at everything inside of the project, and it means that we get really quick autocomplete, and IntelliJ/Android Studio is actually quite nice for this. So now here we are, everything's set up, and we have our class. Exactly what we wanted, right? And you can see here we've got our code, and everyone's happy. First thing I'm going to do is, over in this left-hand corner, it says Android. Now, that's going to show us just like the UI and the Java code, and the main problem we have is I want to actually see the same structure that I would see if I opened Finder or my, File Explorer, or if I looked on GitHub. So I'm going to press Project, and then I'm going to expand that and have a look inside of App, Source, and this is the exact same thing I mentioned to you guys earlier when I was going through all my slides. You can see the package for Java, and then if I double click this, we get our wonderful app. Now, if I just start this, we'll have a look, see what it looks like. It's going to open the Android emulator. So you can actually use the Android emulator, or if you're feeling keen, you can also use your phone and you can enable USB debugging, and you can do it that way. Now, for some reason, Google Calendar is open instead of our app. Our app should show quite literally nothing apart from Hello World in the middle. There you go. So that's just standard Java code right there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump straight into our resources folder, and we're going to go to our UI, and we're going to just tweak this a bit. So if we click on text down here, we can see all of our XML. At the moment we've got a text view, but I don't want a text view, so I'm going to get rid of that. And now I've got to work out how to type with this microphone in front of me. So I've set up some quick kind of aliases, so don't worry if you can't follow along. But first thing we want to do is we want a text view to say to the user what they are trying to do. Just something that says, try and guess a number. Because at the end of the day, we're going to try and guess a number between 1 and 10, let's say. Now, there's a few things in here it's unhappy with. One of those things being it's really unhappy with, it doesn't know what string/guest label is, and it doesn't know what dimension/title size is. These are things that I'm going to define later on in our values directory that we mentioned earlier, but I haven't done that yet. We've also got the constraints at the bottom here, and it goes, I want to constrain it to the user input, but we don't have that yet. So let's add the user input. Now, the user input is an edit text, and an edit text is basically just a text box that you can type something into. You can actually specify the edit text to only accept certain values. In this case, I'm going to let it only accept numbers because we don't need, otherwise we have to put our own validation in to make sure they only submit a number, and we don't need that because that will just cause problems. And here you can see that it says it's going to make sure that it doesn't clash with the text box up here, and it's going to sit nicely here. And you can see over here, if I zoom in, you can see the two of them are sat there quite nicely. However, the padding and stuff isn't quite perfect because we haven't defined that just yet. Okay, so last thing we need is a button to be able to, see if we've actually pressed it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get my my button, and now I have a wonderful button that's going to tell me to try and guess. Again, the issue is you can't actually see what the button says because again we haven't defined that. So let's hop over to our strings.xml file, and I'm going to define all of our strings in one go. So here we go. We've got by default Android will generate for you an app name, so we can actually change what the app's called. I'm going to change it to Hack Quarantine Sesh because we want to have a good time, right? My workshop is looking a bit funny. There we go. And we want it to guess a number. So what it's going to do is it's going to tell the user to guess a number, and then it's going to change the text to say whether they've guessed correctly, whether they've guessed incorrectly, and then this is the text for the button, so we can say submit, and we can then tell it to try again when state 1. So now if we hop back to our UI, this is all a little bit happier. Now, what things are we missing? The things we're currently missing is we don't know how big the font's going to be with this attribute called text size. And we don't know what the margin's going to be. With layout margin, that's going to be the margin all around the outside of that text box, the edit text. And it also doesn't know what onClick means. So what onClick's referring to is if you press the button needs to know what to do. So in our Java code, we can create a function, and we're going to call it onClick. But in this example, I'm going to call it guess number. So that's the name of our function. It's still unhappy because that doesn't exist. Now, to make the rest of this UI happy before we start writing any Java code, I'm going to add in the dimension. So we haven't actually got that file yet. So we right click, we get this horrendous looking menu with all sorts of things. Don't worry about this. We're going to go right to the top to new, and you can see it's got all sorts of scary things. Things you're going to want to look at here is a Kotlin file maybe, or a Java class, wherever the Java one is. A value resource file, which is what we want to do, and I'm just going to make that dim.xml. So now that's there, but we go back to that menu quickly. So you've also got activity. So let's say you want to add a new activity. This will add the Java class as well as the XML layout that you'll need to be able to get started. So it's quite handy for doing a lot of the work for you. And then here's a bunch of Java and Gradle stuff. Another thing that's quite handy is if we want to add images, we can click image asset, and we can actually add our own XML file. We can use some clip art, which is what I mentioned earlier, and I can actually go through and select any icon I want, and now I've got a camera icon. We'll look at this a little bit later. So let's go to our dimensions, and I'm going to put in some dimensions to make sure that our app looks good. So here we've got the margin we discussed, we've got the size of the text, and something that we haven't discussed yet. Now you're going to have to wait and see what this is all about. Now we go back to the main activity. We've got some text, we've got a box, and we've got a button. Everything looks pretty good now. So if I run the app, actually it probably won't run with this bit of code in because it's unhappy, but if I just cut that and I run our app, close it, and run again, and we open the emulator, now we wait 2 years for Android to compile because it's slow, and now we can see we've got a text box that I can type numbers in. I'm typing letters on my keyboard, but nothing is coming up. You can probably hear that. Actually, I can make your life hell. Ready? There you go. Also, that horrible noise is in fact my MacBook taking off. So do bear with. If I press numbers on my keyboard though, that works. And when I press the button, it does absolutely nothing because there is nothing to be, there's nothing it can do. So let's now put that bit of code in. Now let's get to writing some Java code. So we'll hop over to our main activity. There's already a method in here. This method in here is called onCreate. This takes a bundle, which is something that you can look up later, and it calls the parent class onCreate and hands over the same argument. Then it does a thing called setContentView. Now what that does is basically say, when this app starts, use this UI. This UI being the main activity. R's basically just referencing it, and then you say you want the layout from the resources folder, but you can also do like string if we wanted to access strings later, for example. So this bit of code is really important if we want to actually be able to access any of our UI. So the first thing we need to do is actually create some objects of the text view, the button, and the edit text, so we're able to get the information from them and change the information on them, for example, like the text view. So what we're going to do here is we're going to insert a number view, an input edit text, and a generate number function. And we'll refer to that in a minute. Now I need to create some attributes. So if we just make some private attributes, we've got a text view, which you can import like so. I'm going to call that number view, and that's going to be the title. Again, these are horrible variable names. I'm so sorry. We're going to make an edit text. We're going to call this one input edit text. And then it refers to this last thing that we haven't talked about yet. We don't need to refer to the button because the button, so there's two ways of doing it, right? You can get the button to listen, or you can, using a listener, similar to sort of web development, or you can just get the button to call a function when it's pressed, which is, in my opinion, a lot easier. And so for getting started, I think you should do that. Now, next thing we're going to do is create this generate number function or method. So what we have here is a very basic thing. If you press Option Enter on a MacBook keyboard, I think it's Alt Shift, you can import stuff. So what it's done is imported the random library, which is a default Java one. And what I've done is created an object and said, get me the next integer between, I believe it's 1 and 10. Now, what it's going to do is set this to this variable that we haven't defined yet. So we'll just create that called private, what's it called? It's an integer. We call it random number. So now we can set our random integer to the attribute, and we can refer to that later. So let's have a little look at the checklist. What have we done and what haven't we done? So we've got a UI, looks pretty good. Yep, looks pretty good to me. We've got a method that can generate us a random number and set that to an attribute. We've created objects that connect to our UI elements. So here we've got find view by ID, and it literally gets the ID here. So if I go back to this, we give them ID so we can easily refer to them. So that's called a submit button, and that's called user input. And if we go over here again, we can see and number view, which is right at the top here. But the thing you haven't done is what happens when the user presses the button. So if we now put, what would it be called? Click. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? And we're going to change this to, I can't remember what I called it. I called it a guess number. That's a pretty good name. Oh, whoops. Okay. Guess number. So what this does is it takes a view as an argument, so it knows what button actually got pressed, and then you can check inside to make sure it's the correct one. I'm going to import the class, and so now it's happy, and it imports all of this at the top for us, which is very, very easy. That's why Android Studio is really nice for development, because it kind of does a lot of the work for you. Next, we take a string, and we get from the edit text, we get the text, we turn it into a string, and then we turn this into an integer, so we can easily check it against our random number. Then we have an if statement here, which lets us check if the number that we guessed was the same as the random number. If it is, then we ask it to set the text to, well, hey, you guessed correctly, which does this thing where it does set text, and it gets a resource, and it gets a string, and then we give it r.string, the same label we gave it earlier inside of here, guess correct label, and then we can easily give it to that, and that will be able to display the text. So that's how we can do strings using XML. Then we create an intent object, exactly the same to how I did it earlier. And I'm actually going to change this. I can't spell congratulations, it would seem. So I'm going to change this to party activity. I can't spell activity, apparently. There we go. Now I need to import my intent objects, like so. And as you can see here, like I mentioned earlier in the slides, package context is referring to this. That is perfectly fine. It knows that you're talking about this activity. And then it wants to know what it's opening. So in this case, party activity. Then I say, here's the intent, here's the request code, and I want you to return 1 when you're done. So now if I press the button, shall we see what happens? It's probably going to get really unhappy. In fact, I'm actually going to comment out these 2 lines of code, and we'll look at why that is in a second. So we wait for a Gradle to compile and install. It's going to open it on over here. So now if I press this and get rid of the keyboard and press submit, it says I guessed incorrectly. If I try again, I still don't know, right? And I can actually cheat and just get it to print out on my terminal what the random number is. There we go. So 7 was the lucky number. However, it doesn't do anything exciting. It just tells you guessed correctly. Maybe you want to open a new activity that shows off something cool. So what I'm going to do now is uncomment these lines of code. Now, the reason it's unhappy is because we haven't actually created another activity yet. So if I try running this code, Java won't even run because it doesn't know what that is. There you go. It's just immediately crashed before it's even compiled because it's that's a syntax error. It doesn't know what that is. Now, if I go over here, I can right click, and as I did earlier, I can go and create a new activity. I'm going to make another empty activity, and I'm going to call this one party activity because, you know, when we've guessed a correct number, we should party, you know, have a good time. So now what we've done is we've created a new activity. Looks very similar to what we started with. We've got our on crate, and we've also got the set content view, so we've got a layout. Now, if we hop over to here, this is now happy. We run our app one more time. We wait, there we go. Actually, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get it to print out what the random number is because I'm lazy. Now this is leak coding right here. There we go. We'll just close that. And we'll start again. Here we go. So now if I open run, we can see somewhere inside of here, the random number is in fact 2. So it says system.out said 2. Now if I put 1 in, it should do nothing, right? And it did nothing. But if I put 2 in, it says we guessed correctly, and it's opened a new activity, but there's completely nothing on it, right? This is not particularly useful. So what I'm going to do now is create a really nice party activity. So we don't really care about this. We'll talk about the Java code a bit later, but we're not really trying to do anything. We want to actually show something cool. So let's hop over back to our XML. Now, as you can see, there's just a layout with no views. It's exactly the same as my diagram. We've got our layout that's going to tell everything where to be, apart from there's nothing to tell where to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an image. So we've got a thing called an image view, which displays a PNG or whatever you would like, a bitmap, quite easily to the user. And here in Android source, I'm going to tell the user what they should put. Now we want to put a drawable called cake. We don't have a drawable called cake. If I open the drawable folder, there is apparently the background to the app icon, and that'll be the foreground here. There you go. Again, Android, there you go. We don't really care about the app icon right now. We want to, display some cake. So if I right click on here, I can add a vector asset. Now this is our icons inside of the app. So if I go to the top and search cake, I can get a nice cake icon. That's exactly what we want. And I'm going to set this to be, let's make it a nice blue, Hat Quarantine sort of colors. And now I have a thing called a cake. Apart from I didn't label it cake, that was a mistake. So if you click refactor, rename, I can just name that cake very easily. There you go. Job done. Now we have a blue cake on our screen. So let's rerun the app. Quickly have a look. We're getting there. Now the app is rebuilt. We can have a look. And the magic number this time is again 7. What are the odds of that? Now if we click submit, we can see we've got a cake icon. Pretty cool, right? But what if we want to try again? let's make this an infinite loop, because I don't know about you, I could spend all evening guessing between 1 and 10. Maybe that's just me, but having to close the app, having to force close the app and then open it again. Oh, I've used this VM for quite a few apps. Hack quarantine, there we go. I've got to try. That's not user friendly. So how about we add a button to our party activity to say try again? Could be a good idea. So now let's have a try again button. Again, very similar to the button we had earlier. Let me make this more. It's quite big, this. There we go. It wants an ID called label. Now a get try again button. Now, I don't think that's in my thing. So we're going to make a very quick text view. And we're going to make it wrap its content, which basically means that it will be as big as it needs to be, whereas match parent means it will match the entire screen, which is what happens here with match parent here, and that's why the cake's very big. I'm going to give this an ID of label, ID label, and now it knows what I want. It's put the button right in the middle there. And then after this, I'm going to tell it what to say. So you can do text, and I've got a try again text box, and you can see a text label, text string, let's call it, right at the top here. It just says try again. Hey, I see you, Dark Q Timer. Long time no see. So we have to try again, but that's not ideal. And why is it at the top there? If I just minimize that, why is our try again right at the top of the screen? If we have a look in the design view, it's going to start screaming at us. There we go. So we haven't constrained our view. We've got a constraint layout, and it's like, great, I have a view, but you've not told me where you actually want me to put it. You've just said in the middle somewhere. It's not ideal, right? We need to actually tell it where we want it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste some of this because I'm lazy. If in doubt, copy and paste your code. There we go. And now this is going to match the parent and be in the middle. I'm also going to change it so the color is still white actually, because otherwise it will be a bit rubbish. There we go. And then make sure you close your tags. If you don't close your tags, you're going to get some problems, and that's not ideal, right? Now, we have a try again thing, but it's on top of this picture because I've told it to be constrained by the parent. So this means it's going to be right in the middle of the screen. Actually, if I go to the design view, it will show this off very well. You can see it's just sat in the middle, and you can't see it very well. So if I just put that to the bottom of the list, you still can't see that very well. Great. I want the image at the top. There we go. So we can say the image, rather than being constrained to the bottom of the bottom, we can say be constrained to the top, the bottom of it to be constrained to the top of our label. If I put the right number of things, there we go. And then our label, we can say, rather than being to the top of parent, we can say to the layout is constrained to the top of the bottom of the cake. I haven't given the cake an ID, so if I'm going to refer to this as quite literally cake view. I love a good view of a cake, Cake is a good view. Now, Android's still unhappy. We haven't quite finished writing the code. Calm down, Android Studio. No need to rush. We've got 10 minutes. So, now the issue is our cake's still really big. So we're going to get that to wrap content. Now it's really small. And this is unhappy. I don't know why. There you go. ID label. There we go. Everything's getting a little bit bigger now. If we go to our dimensions folder, I have a cake margin. Let's just put one in here called cake size as well. And I'm going to make that 50 dp. Fairly big. We'll find out if it's fairly big. I'm going to only set that to be the height. So we've got our @diam cake size. That's really done nothing to it. I'm going to set it here. That's quite small. So now I can actually just set this to be like 500, right? Go back here. Oh, it's really big. Maybe set that to like 200. Easy. Mad strats. There we go. This text button's quite faint. So let's make that. Let's change the color of that as well. We just set that to a nice black. There we go. So we can just refer to @Android color/black. And now it's a nice black. We can also make the size slightly bigger. So if I do Android text size, refer to the title size, now we have a nice try again button However, it doesn't work because it doesn't know what this try again method's called. So if I hop back over to our party activity, I can make a nice try again thing, but I don't seem to have one, which is a little bit of a problem. So we're going to make one ourselves. I'm going to call it try again. And in here, we'll give it a view, like I mentioned earlier. Make sure to import your view class. And then all I'm going to get it to do is finish activity with the number 1. So it will give it back to our parent, our other class. Now, that's all well and good that we give it the number 1, but there's nothing in this Java code that's going to listen for that number 1, which is where we need to have an activity result, which is going to sit there and listen. I think that needs to override as well. We'll find out in a minute if it gets really unhappy. So you override the parent class, and it's now going to listen for a request code. If the request code we give it is 1, it's going to generate a new number. And we can test this now. Ooh, Android Studio with its lots of buttons can be quite confusing. Here we go. So let's have a look and run. All sorts of Android stuff we don't care about. You're not going to tell me what the number is. Looks like we're guessing. I don't know why that happened. Submit. You guessed incorrectly. It's alright. Submit. You're wrong. It's alright. We've got loads of time. 4. Submit. 5. Submit. 6. Submit. 7. Hey, there we go. So you guessed correctly. And it's opened our nice activity. Now if I press try again, it didn't do anything. Spooky. Now, why did I not do anything? That is a very good question. Now we have hit a dilemma. Is that because this doesn't actually catch 1? Let's get this to print out, right? Guess. This is proper debugging, right? We'll completely close the app. Oh, I'm missing a semicolon. You can tell I write too much Python and too much Kotlin. Now, here we go. Ooh, sorry. So, it should have told us the number is 3 we're looking for. 3 is our magic number. So if I click submit and try again. Is that not... It says guess. Am I doing the wrong finish? I might be giving it the wrong finish. I don't know what the finish is supposed to be. Well, normally you can just tell it's a normal finish, right, like that. And it will... hang on. That's where I'm going wrong. You give it quite literally just finish. I was confused myself. So the number we're looking for is 4. Right, press submit, try again. There we go. And it's now guessed a new number, which is 1. Now I can guess again, submit, and we can continuously end this. This loop will just continue going forever and ever. The reason we don't need to give it 1 here is because we've already given this class 1. And so when it finishes, it knows that it's the same case. It's going to return the same thing. We don't need to give it the number because it already has it. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is, as you saw with guessing, I have to press the submit button. It'd be really nice if I could just press the little tick on my keyboard like you can with some apps. So inside of our onCreate, we're going to create a listener. And this is going to be called an edit listener, an input and edit text listener. I'm going to go around and import all the classes. This is a class that a method that doesn't exist because we renamed it. And what this does is it basically will now listen every time. It will listen for edits on the edit text. And it will see that if we press a keyboard, that is the enter key, or the done key, depending on what your keyboard is, it might be a bit weird. Then it will call the function guess number for us and return true. So we don't have to press the submit button if we don't want to. If I do that, press run again. Now we wait. So the number we're looking for is... It's not going to tell me, is it? I don't know why. Yeah, the debugging can be a bit kind of unhelpful sometimes. So, I guess correctly. Well, hey, there you go. 7's the number. So if I press 7, if I put 23 in, it'll be like, that's not a number. If I now press, let's pretend I'm using an actual phone and press submit. There you go. Now our keyboard works, and that's just a little bit more user-friendly and a little bit just more convenient for the user. So that is kind of it for how to build a very basic Android app. All of this code you found right now will be on my GitHub at github.com/wrussell1999. This can be found actually, if I press that button, that can be found right below. There you go. It can be found just below here at wrussell1999. You can also follow me on Twitter at that same handle, and I hope to see you all on the Discord server chatting. Feel free to come chat to me. More than happy to help your projects, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you at Checkpoint happening on Monday or Tuesday/Wednesday. Thank you all, and talk to you soon.